we only had one side playing nuclear brinkmanship. Now we have a president who's not afraid to rattle the nuclear sabre back. And so I think this will neutralize Putin's nuclear threats in Ukraine. And I do think that, again, Putin respects and fears America's nuclear weapons. And so I think that this, combined with some of the other measures, may be enough to get Putin to rethink the strategy in Ukraine and maybe start to consider serious negotiations over Ukraine.
It's on two front pages. President Trump has said he's ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be, quote, positioned in the appropriate regions in Russia to respond to highly provocative comments by the former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. The US president has said he acted, quote, in case these foolish and inflammatory statements are more than just that. It's a move which has been criticised by some, but not by our next guest. Matthew Kroenig is Vice President and Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Centre for Strategy and Security. Matthew, welcome to the programme.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Right. Now, one of our commentators earlier said she was worried at this move. 2 highly unpredictable leaders with their finger on the nuclear button. You don't know where this is going to end. And I'm wondering whether you share that alarm.
No, I think this was a really smart move by Trump. And I think it's really part of the broader Ukraine strategy. We've seen that Trump has been frustrated with Putin's intransigence. He's getting impatient. He's turning up the pressure on Putin in other ways, providing Patriot missiles to Ukraine, threatening sanctions. And I think these nuclear threats are part of that overall pressure of putting or strategy of putting pressure on Putin to get him to the table, and in some ways could be the most effective. We know that Putin respects and fears nuclear weapons. That's part of the reason that he makes nuclear threats so often. And so I think this will get Putin's attention, make him feel the pressure, and with any luck, get him to the table to negotiate on Ukraine.
Whose decision do you think this was? I mean, of course, the president is commander-in-chief, but what about the people around him, the senior generals, the senior officials?
I suspect this was an option that was delivered up to Trump by his administration, by the military. I think he said, I want to get tough with Putin. What options do you have? And this was one that they presented him. And I suspect the Medvedev comments were really more the occasion rather than the real cause.
Right. I'm just looking at the U.S. Navy's portfolio. It's got 14 Ohio-class submarines, each capable of firing 20 Trident missiles, the Times tells us, armed with nuclear warheads, and more than half of America's nuclear arsenal is carried on its ballistic missile fleet of submarines. How do you think the Russians will respond? How do you think President Trump would like President Putin and Dmitry Medvedev to respond?
Yes, well, Putin has used nuclear threats from the very beginning in the war in Ukraine, and I think the West and the Biden administration were intimidated by that, were worried about escalation, and so we only had one side playing nuclear brinkmanship. Now we have a president who's not afraid to rattle the nuclear sabre back, and so I think this will neutralize Putin's nuclear threats in Ukraine. And I do think that, again, Putin respects and fears America's nuclear weapons. And so I think that this, combined with some of the other measures, may be enough to get Putin to rethink the strategy in Ukraine and maybe start to consider serious negotiations over Ukraine.
Is that right, Matthew? Because I saw a clip of President Putin alongside his ally from Belarus, Lukashenko, saying, well, perhaps the reason why some people are frustrated, i.e. Trump, is that they had exaggerated expectations, which is why they're disappointed. And he was being quite salty.
Yes, well, I think we see that Putin is pretty determined in Ukraine. And up until now, his strategy has been to slowly push in Ukraine at very high cost to him and to Russia. I think in the expectation that the West would eventually cave. And I think what he's seeing now is that Trump is not caving. Trump is now turning up the pressure. And so I suspect this is just the beginning, too. There's a lot more the United States could do in this regard. It could pull out of the New START treaty, which is set to expire anyway in February. It could upload more nuclear weapons on its missiles, which is something a bipartisan congressional commission recommended recently. It could move nuclear weapons from Western Europe further east into Poland, which is something that some experts have argued may be necessary. And so I think there is a lot the United States can do with regard to strategic forces. Golden Dome has been a big Trump priority. He could declare that with Golden Dome, he's going to render Putin's nuclear weapons obsolete. Because remember, nuclear weapons is essentially the only place where Russia is still a superpower. And so by hitting Putin there, I think it will have more of an effect maybe than these other measures like sanctions or
Yeah.
conventional military action.
Matthew, briefly, wouldn't it have been a lot better for President Trump and indeed for the Ukrainians who have really suffered in the 7 months or so since President Trump came back to power, promising to end this within 24 hours, if he had been much more muscular earlier on in January and February, instead of dangling all kind of carrots in front of Putin and beating Zelensky with a stick?
I think so. If I were in charge, that's what I would have done. Maybe that's what you would have done, but we weren't elected president.
Huh.
And so I think Trump's instinct was to try the carrots first. And I think now he's seen that's not going to work. And so now he's turning to the sticks.
All right. Matthew Kroenig, Vice President and Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Centre for Strategy and Security. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
The nuclear submarines.
Oh yeah, well we had to do that. We just have to be careful. And a threat was made and we didn't think it was appropriate, so I have to be very careful. So I do that on the basis of safety for our people. A threat was made by a former president of Russia, and we're going to protect our people. And then after the election, they corrected it by 800 or 900